First thing we're going to get into is this from, like I said, Juniper Research. Why? Well, let's face it, everybody. There's a lot of things that need to be mentioned. In their timeline, which I'll full screen here for you, they mention specifically this whole PDF of some key players. And what's it say in figure 1 on page 6 of 12? Well, it's the competitor leaderboard, CBDC vendors, disruptors, challengers, leading challengers. And what's really interesting is how you see Ripple actually has a bigger circle than R3 Corda. That's incredibly interesting. Also, you see some ones that it's somewhat equal to, like Edemia. And if anything, even consensus is not even the area for established leaders. It's in the area for leading challengers. You do see Stellar out there, and they're also on that list of leading challengers. And I'll give a nice shout out to our brother, Jack Thompson. I thought it was interesting to see Sora Mitsu listed there because, let's face it, that was 100% down. Is there really something there in regards to 2024, 2025, going all the way out to 2031? I think the answer is yes. And again, what's it say here? Global CBDCs and stablecoin market, 2024, 2031. I said 2025 because we're almost there. Okay. So this is a competitor leaderboard. And again, Juniper Research. I will be fast tracking through most of this, but I want to take you to some of these key things. In a video that you're going to see here just in a little bit, you're going to see it straight from the RSN. And of course, that's a regulated settlement network. There's, of course, also the regulated liability network. There's a key person from CITI that mentions specifically Sullivan, Cromwell, and he mentions this lady. It's Rebecca J. Simmons. Now, you may be wondering, why point her out? Well, again, headquartered in New York. We've seen a lot of things go on with Brad Garlinghouse and the excitement about RLUSD. But when it comes to Ripple, understand that, a lot of attention was on them, but it's not just them. And again, for this segment, till we get to some other coins like the X's, we will put some emphasis on Ripple for a time being. Rebecca Simmons is a partner in the firm's financial services and capital markets groups. Remember how many times we talked about those ecosystems? She's the head of its payments practice and co-head of its fintech practice. She represents, clients in the development of payments, settlement, clearing, and other financial technology businesses, systems, structuring, development, financial products, novels. I mean, a lot, right? But here's the thing. When we get further into the outline, especially when it comes to Quant, I see some of you guys' comments. Some of you guys have pointed out that you feel as though that since Quant is UK and Australia, that they don't have a US presence. Are you sure about that? What's the point of being fully interoperable if you're only going to have networks only talk to certain geographical locations? Internet doesn't work that way. So getting further into this, I wanted to point out some of the key highlights. Yes, it is the practices that include like US banking and so on. As we get further into it, there's an emphasis on settlement system. Again, back to the whole idea of the RLN and, of course, the regulated settlement network, the RSN. It's the development of rules for derivatives clearing organizations to accommodate clear swap transactions. What about atomic swaps? Remember how we talked about some of those repos and things like that? Yeah, we've done our homework many times over the course of 3 years or more now, and a lot of other great content creators, researchers have as well. But does it mention specifically the RLN? The answer is yes. Ms. Simmons led the team that advised the legal working group in connection with the U.S., by the way, regulated liability network. Some of you guys, nothing against you, but you felt as though that this was strictly a European thing. As you see on the screen, it's not. Where's the source come from? It comes from solcrum.com/lawyers, this particular outline of Rebecca J. Simmons. Okay, so we established that. Let's take you over to this key highlight from the RSN proof of concept. Listen to this. Pay close attention to this. This is where they say it's not a matter of if, it's when. At the end of the day, I understand, that some people feel as though that you may want to take profits or you're going to become the profits. Some people also look at it from the perspective of, paper hand or you'll become the 9 to 5. So with that said, let's go ahead and play this and get into the weeds of why it matters. Here we go.
There's a detailed legal report which was released today as part of the project. Maybe I could ask you, Rebecca, as well, to kind of share from a legal perspective, what were some of the findings from your analysis of the potential applicability and operations of this, its role within existing securities and capital markets and infrastructure regulation, and kind of how to think about this within the mature regulatory frameworks we all operate in?
Thank you, Charles. Excuse me. Yes, the legal working group looked at issues in essentially three categories. The first was, could you make a system like this work? So from that perspective, we were looking at issues like the contractual enforceability of the provisions that we would expect to be required in a rule book to govern a system like this. And then the ever-present question of settlement finality, whether you can ensure, excuse me, that all the learning that's been done in traditional settlement systems over the last century or so could be extended to this settlement platform, and whether you could have the same certainty of settlement finality for both the cash and other assets moved. A second category of issues we looked at was what regulatory framework might or could apply to the FMI itself, and also, if any, would apply to a participant by virtue of being a participant or settling transactions through the system. And then finally, we looked at questions, not all the questions you would have to consider, but some of the initial questions you would have to think about in terms of the impact of using a system like this on compliance with other types of regulatory requirements, such as those relating to record keeping and the application of federal deposit insurance to the cash held at commercial banks. So the headline answer was that we think you would be able to set up a system like the system contemplated in the proof of concept without any changes to existing law and achieve settlement finality and with respect to each of the assets that were contemplated. Now, there is a substantial amount of discretion with respect to a number of the frameworks that we looked at, and regulators could interpret them in ways that would be more or less restrictive of a system like this. And there are ways that we think the regulators could facilitate the development of a system like this, including by looking at questions relating to the use of distributed ledger for record keeping and similar functions on a day-to-day basis. So with respect to settlement finality, because of the way this was designed, we think you can rely on the existing commercial law framework of the Uniform Commercial Code. Given the way this was designed, we did not really need to apply the newest phase or the newest chapter article of the Uniform Commercial Code that relates specifically to digital assets, which has not been enacted in New York. But we don't think you would need to rely on that statute for such a system to operate. The analysis goes on for many pages that only a lawyer could love, and it's in the report. With respect to the registration, because the system would handle both cash and securities, it would be of interest to both the Fed and the SEC. The regulatory frameworks for both would not necessarily result in a registration requirement for an FMI operating this system. It is possible that FSOC could exercise its authority under the Dodd-Frank Act to designate such a system as systemically important, and then there is a framework that would apply to it in that context. But that, of course, would depend on both the materiality of the system and the willingness of the administration to apply those designation powers. That said, again, there is discretion in the application of some of those requirements, and the SEC in particular might seek to extend its clearing agency registration requirements to such an FMI. That said, if they did, we see no reason that would impair the ability of the system to operate.
And I'll just tell a quick story, which was we were doing an education session. Deloitte came in and did an education session with some of our executives. One specifically was the owner of our treasury products, and he hadn't really been too far into this with us. He'd heard about it, but probably about 20 minutes into the education session, he was furiously, teamsing me, IMing me, saying, you could see the light bulb go off over his head. He goes, "This could really change everything, couldn't it?" And I said, "Yes, it really could." And so for me, that was a great little tableau of how people who really know that business, when they see the new paradigm that it potentially would be built here, they see the benefit. And to me, latency is the enemy. Complexity of transaction is the enemy. and that what has been posited by the group and a lot of hard work by everyone is really aimed at decreasing both of those. And so for me, it's not a matter of when an FMI like this will occur. It is more a matter of who, how, when. And so I think it is, up to a lot of the people in this room and other people to decide how we're going to move forward to this, because it's going to happen. And it's just a matter of, how it comes to fruition.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I'm not the only one who stated this for quite some time, but to actually hear this from a committee of people that are tied to institutions, whether it's CITI or these key people from law firms that sit on regulatory bodies to get the whole thing going, that's where it's at for me. And I think that's where it's at for a lot of you guys. Moving further into this, I want to show some other key things for you that you might want to pay attention to. The next thing we're going to jump into is from Deloitte, because you heard specifically, Deloitte. I know that the frame was really small in regards to the video, but they're the ones that featured the RSN in this particular board meeting, and especially getting the whole ball rolling for the United States. Yes, that's right, the United States. So what you're going to see right here is from Deloitte.com. And again, some of the big players that we're already aware of. You have your MasterCards and your Swifts and, on and on, right? Visa, Wells Fargo, we've seen on, Overledger integration, the whole thing of that talking to Quant. But again, the highlight, what is the highlight? Well, Bank of New York, Mellon, Broadridge, DTCC, International Swaps Derivatives Association, Tacit Group. Tacit's huge if you've been following them. And also Mitre Corporation will engage in a non-commercial knowledge contributor. All right, awesome. What about the whole thing about, financial institutions and so on? Well, look at this. This does include settling tokenized wholesale central bank money, everybody. Commercial bank money, U.S. Treasury securities, Boom. There's that. We get further into this, just in case you weren't aware of the whole thing with Tacit, some people do ask, is Tacit basically, the whole thing of, do they have a partnership with Ripple? Well, back in the day, that name of Tacit, the answer would be no. But if you've been following Tacit, well, then the answer became yes, because if anything, they had a name change. Tacit then later on became what's now referred to as Zoniqx. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but nonetheless, I believe it was, announced last February of this year about that whole thing, just to bring you, to why that's a huge deal. My goodness, let's full screen this. Let's bring it to you on the screen. What do you have if you were to go over to Zoniqx.com? You see front row center, top actually, constant mentions about how they're proud to be recognized or partnered with yours truly, Ripple XRP. You see, that whole thing going on about how they're proud to be recognized in the Q1 2024 report. It's kind of going back and forth, but 1 billion tokenized equity debt fund. And you also see the whole thing about leveraging XRPL, right? Lots of mentions about it. And, some other stations, programs, where you want to call it, have covered this. Data center investments across the United States, like you just saw it there for a brief moment, and some of the other particular ones, okay? But again, United States, UAE, India, Europe, right? XRP Ledger, awesome. Generate liquidity, tokenized financial instruments, and, you see it. And here's the thing. How big could it be? Well, this is not me stating it. These are some big players. $1 trillion market potential, revolutionizing asset tokenization, and unleashing 16 trillion with a T as in Tom opportunity by 2030. Digital asset tokenization. Wow. Okay. And just off of public equities, funds, and bonds, that's 1.8 trillion. Okay, well, let's focus on the 16.1 trillion in, digital asset tokenization. Because when we do that, what's 1% of 16.1 trillion? Well, it's basic math. It's 161 billion, right? Excuse me, I still got a little bit of under the weather. So nonetheless, these are huge, huge numbers, right? So, it's like, man, I mean, Ripple XRP, just 1%. Can you imagine the value of 161 billion if it was able to get to some of those big numbers? Again, for me, it's not a matter of if, like they mentioned, it's just a matter of when. All right, what else do we have in regards to this concept of the RLM? Well, screenshot, clip, where you want to call it from, literally Quant Papa's notes. Shout out to Quant Papa. We contemplate the future of finance in the wake of these advancements in tokenized deposits. In the RLN, it is clear that we are on the cusp of major transformation in how we perceive and interact with money. Again, I get the whole concept of, take profits or you be the profits. But again, for me, I'm not trying to just stick around to the 9 to 5 and have a little bit more money. So call what you want, paper hands or you become the 9 to 5. All right. God bless everybody else that has a different perspective. Right. But anyway, moving forward. What else do we have? Well, the citation actually comes from a pamphlet from Ripple, Tokenized Deposits, Essentials, and Impact. This year, 2024, we're not in 2025 yet, almost there. But when you get further into this, even Finaxtra, right, the quote-unquote competition, cites some things that's really interesting. Kelly Matheson, if you're not aware of her, Chief Business Development Officer over at Digital Asset. You guys follow Digital Asset, right on. Says, quote, at the heart of its success was a meticulous design stage which shaped the technology infrastructure to deliver seamless simultaneous settlement. Okay, back to the whole thing of the RSN. But this solves the whole thing of configuration, functional challenges, and look what it says in regards to API changes. Think about, say what you want. Quant just stands out here something fierce. So test case development, execution, you get the whole idea about this roadmap. But here's your aha moment, all right? I saw a few people, nothing against them, right? We all had different perspectives. I will never be the type of person that, like I have some friends that do this. I'm sure you guys do it too. They always like to say, well, I told you so. I like to told you so. It's not about I told you so. We're all on our different levels of learning, and it's okay. But some of you guys are pointing out, plain as day, you might be that guy listening right now, about how you feel as though the Quant has no U.S. presence. That's malarkey. I say that politely because even right here, we know that the U.S. RSN, because we know Quant's involvement with the RLN and the RSN, the U.S. RSN showcases how interconnected, synchronized applications can eliminate complexity and enhance operational efficiency. Look what it says in regards to collaboration efforts. To avoid narrow proof of concept silos, look at the terminology here, everybody. How many times has Gilbert Verdian mentioned this? So to avoid it, we have prioritized broad integration scalability from the outset. By implementing true simultaneous settlement and leveraging real-time updates, the US RSN exemplifies how next-generation networks could operate. Yeah, we have to minimize settlement delays, reduce the risk, etc., etc. All right, well, back to XRP, because if you're not aware of it, there was this interview from Greg Kidd, Chief Risk Officer at Ripple Labs Senate of Canada 2015. Shout out to Bank XRP covering this 6 years ago, right? So why am I fast forwarding to this key part? You'll see why here in a second. And if anything, how we tie in the rest of this. This is the one you want to listen to. I'm telling you flat out. This is the outline you really want to hear. Here we go.
In my view, a large portion of today's inefficiencies in payments stem from antiquated infrastructure. In many countries, the technology underpinning payments was last updated in the 1970s and was not designed with interoperability in mind. Because systems are not compatible, banks have to rely on a patchwork of intermediaries to move funds, a process which introduces risks, delays, and costs. Ripple Labs aims to improve payments by offering modern, interoperable payment infrastructure for registered financial institutions, clearinghouses, and central banks. As Ripple is payment technology for financial institutions, consumers may never know their transactions are being sent through Ripple, just as they have little to no knowledge of the ACH and wire rails that facilitate their payments today. Our technology is designed to minimize payment and counterparty risk, reduce costs, and enable connectivity between banks and payment networks. Before discussing the technology we use, I want to highlight that Ripple's technology fully complements existing regulations. When using Ripple, a financial institution's responsibility for OFAC reporting, anti-money laundering, compliance, know your customer requirements, and other regulatory reporting stays fully intact.
So these statements that, was mentioned a while back, I mean, if you think about it, it's not just Ripple always sticking to the guns because they don't want to get that label of being a security, but in reality, even before they were attacked, this is dates all the way back to 2015, you can see that, yeah, you know what? Canada got behind it. You're welcome to watch that full particular interview. Just, go to Bank XRP as a clip, or you could just look and research more about Greg Kidd. He is the chief risk officer, at least at the time, over at Ripple. And, he had a meeting with the Senate of Canada back in 2015. So this is long before the whole thing with Jay Clayton going after the SEC, or excuse me, after Ripple, and then the whole thing, Gary Gensler continuing on, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Jumping more into some other key developments. This is recent news. Again, not too long ago, not exactly yesterday, but this particular update, if you will, in regards to CITI, JPMorgan, others complete tokenization settlement trials. What are we referring to? Well, think about it. The whole thing of the RSN, December 5th, by the way. Okay. So RSN, Regulated Settlement Network, and we see some key things here in regards to it all. The 10 institutions that simulated the trials, again, pounding home everything you saw in that video from that RSN panel. SIFMA acted as a coordinator for the institutions involved, which were CITI, JPMorgan, MasterCard, Swift, TD Bank, all these big ones, right? USDF, Wells Fargo, Visa. You kind of get the gist, right? So, there's, of course, benefits of this. We studied this for, like 2 years, right? Give or take. But the point is, always on networks, 24/7 networks with settlement outside of the working hours of traditional banks and so on. The interesting thing, though, is when this was all announced, like I point out in a different outline, why would Gilbert Verdian like this? Why would he like the whole idea that SIFMA, which is supposed to be outside of the realm of, something like Quant and so on, supposedly, right? Well, why would he like this? Because, again, when we talk about interoperability, it's working with everybody. Members of the United States financial sector have demonstrated the feasibility of multi-asset and cross-network settlement, of course, using a shared ledger. A unified shared ledger. It doesn't say that right there. It gets cut off, but that was what it was about. And again, back to the whole thing of the RSN. Plain as day. Domestic users of U.S. dollars regulated securities. The upgraded asset class, if you will. Transactions and so on. This whole narrative that some of you guys are spinning, that Quant has no U.S. presence. That doesn't, you're not studying the whole thing of Quant. You're limiting to a geographical location instead of focusing on, the next era of the internet, getting from Web 2.5, 2.7 to Web 3. All right. So earlier, the whole thing with SIFMA from Ledger Insights was mentioned, right? We saw that literally like right up here. Okay. So if we were to go over to make, some of you guys who are new, you're wondering, well, is there really any CITI connection to, the Overledger with Quant? The answer is yes. I already, took in the liberty to make this kind of connect for you guys through my Make account. Okay, so you see orchestration happening here. CITI to the Overledger, make an API call back to CITI, parser account, blah, blah, blah. And then over to the Overledger to prepare a smart contract transaction. We're not going to, do the full thing, but just, again, a quick example. Yeah, it definitely does talk to it. All right. Is there any other examples? Well, if we were to go to JPMorgan, they have this whole thing of payments partner network, connecting the innovation of their technology partners and, of course, the strength of JPMorgan. Do you see all the key players that we talked about, whether it's with Stellar, with Visa, MasterCard? We have MasterCard and Visa both with Stellar. We have it both with, for example, Quant. We've seen it, of course, with Hedera and some other key ones, but they're part of that list. You see Oracle there. That definitely stands out, not just with JPMorgan, especially when it comes to Quant, right? So what do we have in regards to exploring some of this when it comes to integration? Well, when we get further into this, well, it takes us to this next particular tab, because there is what they're, referred to as connectivity, the providers, the payment providers, if you will, payment solutions. So emphasis is a little bit on Oracle, and there's going to be some other key ones here, okay? So I know that we've done this in the past, but I wanted to show you more of that orchestration example. You see the orchestration of Oracle Fusion Cloud Sales to make an API call. I went a little bit more in depth with this one. Talks to the Overledger, reads from a smart contract, kicks it over to Oracle Fusion Cloud ERP to get a record, by the way. Record of what? Something that's on storage? Yes, exactly. How about to the Overledger to prepare a smart contract transaction? Kicking it back over to Oracle Sales, by the way, for Oracle Fusion Cloud Sales to update a record, and then to finalize that by signing a transaction. So been there, done that, but again, a little bit different visual compared to, obviously what you saw before. Again, I thought it was crucial to, share that with you, because if you understand the concept of this, I know I'm fast tracking through this, is basic search, JPMorgan Oracle Cloud ERP. What is it? Well, understand it's an integration that provides a solution for reporting and payments that connects seamlessly. Oracle announced in September 11th this year, partnership that expands across treasury, trade, commerce. I've been calling this for a couple years, but sometimes people wanted that speculation to be confirmation. Hey, I get it. I can respect that. I do the same thing. As we get further into this, you go to datacenterdynamics.com. What do you have? This is where it gets crucial, because when we talk about, like for me, I love Filecoin. I have a lot of Filecoin. I won't marry my Filecoin, but there's ones I'm going to take profits on, So Filecoin really stands out when it comes to the IPFS, interplanetary file system, storage. There's some other great projects out there. Shout out to Tim Shea. There's like, Flux. There's some real solid, great storage ones out there. Heck, even Jasmine's part of that mix, technically speaking, right? Just a different utility layer. But is Quant part of that mix through things like Oracle? Connected to what? JPMorgan. The answer is yes. Because when we get further into it, JPMorgan, like it says, last April of this year, hosts 75% of its data in the cloud. Yeah, literally this year. Financial services giant seeks to build AI and analytics capabilities. You already have the AI plug to securitize, humanize from the AI side of Quant. And, that's a deep dive rabbit hole that we've already gone down. And if anything, check out my videos catalog. Most of my videos are not time sensitive, and it's there for you for a reason if you want to learn more about it. All right. What about more about these payment networks? You have American Express. You have UnionPay. Why point out UnionPay? Well, they have a partnership with JPMorgan Chase, allows merchants to accept payments from UnionPay card at JPMorgan Chase acquired merchant locations. Well, I don't know if you guys remember when I did this with you. Overledger does what? It talks to Global Payments WebPay, and it creates a recurring payment regular subscription. Global Payments WebPay is massive, absolutely massive. And if you guys remember this is a key highlight from my deep dive about the shocking truth about Quant and Global Payments WebPay. Why? Well, I don't need to play the whole thing for you. Just read this particular clip. Just in case you didn't see that deep dive and you're new to the channel, welcome, by the way. I really appreciate you guys. Global Payments is one of the largest merchant service providers in the world, processing, by the way, more than 1.2 billion payments each year. The company offers merchant services to more than 2.5 million merchants across 29 countries and accepts all major credit and debit card mechanisms, if you will, schemes, to include schemes, I should say, China's UnionPay. Again, UnionPay connected to what? Global Payments WebPay. Again, just in case this flew over your head, why is that important? Because what do you see here? That's part of the partners of course, JPMorgan. people saying that there's no connection to Quant and JPMorgan. We already been there and done that. All right. What else do I have? Well, we get further into this. A basic search kind of caught my attention. It's the whole concept, everybody, of what is referred to as shadow committees. You know, why point this out? Because I want you guys to understand that when we talk about Quant, especially Quant, when we talk about the RLN, the RSN, and all these types of concepts, well, just like you saw earlier from the gentleman from, was it over at Ripple at the time, Greg Kidd, talking about, you know, there will be things that will happen in regards to like Ripple with the transactions and people won't even know that it's gone through. Well, how about API calls? And you know, like how the Overledger will require a certain amount of QNT, slivers, if you will, there's a limited supply happening on every single API call. My gosh, you know, but we're not into 2025, everybody. And I know that a lot of you guys are going to ask me all sorts of price predictions and stuff like that. At the end of the day, listen to the research, draw your own conclusion when it comes to that. But it has to be, in my opinion, an incredibly high amount. It will get there. But a lot of us, not me, I'll tell you that this much, not this guy. You're going to get flooded out of it. And it is what it is. But here's the key thing. Like I mentioned, as we get further into this, specifically speaking, we full screen this. Shadow committees? Again, what works in the background? So NL, Netherlands, right? Shadow committee for ISO TC 307, the Quant Network Standard. Are you kidding? Yeah, it's a real thing. If you go to beta-allerverning.nl, shout out to, you know, Sebastian, he probably can interpret that. Mentions here that this shadow committee determines, among other things, through agreed procedures in dialogue with the whole thing of like a national position on subjects, offering voting globally via ISO TC 307. The national position is adopted as the NEN position. That's NEN. And then passed on to the International Secretariat of TC 68. Now, here's the thing. Again, why point this out? Because if you were to go to this PDF about annual report for Dutch payments back in 2017, you see, specifically speaking, this whole thing of, you know, an initiative. And you see the whole thing of, now we talked about Quant and SEPA, tomato, right? So how many times did we talk about SEPA? Look at what it mentions. Payment Association also chairs with NEN Shadow Committee of ISO TC 68, TC 68 Technical Committee. And then on the bottom, it says this includes a number of standards for very great importance to the payment system. We've done the material and the outlines about IBAN. We did a little bit about BIC, but again, ISO 222 messages. Again, the orchestration of that. Because when we get to the next part, that shadow committee holds national votes on standardization proposals made by TC 68, together with several other parties. Okay, that's the Netherlands, though, right? Shout out to our brother Tokenizer. He says, and I've done this too, the liaison, there is a liaison between TC 307 and TC 68. Through who? Gilbert Verdian. So we redone that. And again, if you're new, understanding that ISO TC 307 is the Quant Network Standard. Going back to this, does this document mention anything about TC 307? The answer is yes. Specifically, right from that shadow committee, technical standard, ISO TC 307 was set up again 2017, and they cite the whole thing of their role. And this part is interesting. I think it's kind of spooky in a way. We are regularly approached by stakeholders with relatively complex issues. This applies to social partners, a national form of payment system, MOB. What an abbreviation, right? But nonetheless, they communicated and they act as a mouthpiece, if you will, on radio, television, where topics affect the sector being covered. They talk about the whole thing about card payment forms, includes consumers, businesses. Again, back to that whole reference about JPMorgan. As we get further into this, I decided to look more into, you know, the whole thing about the shadow committee. And when I got more into it, I thought this was odd. Sorry, we cannot find this page. Yeah, that's convenient, right? That's really convenient. Because I said to myself, can't find this page. And this page, I guess that particular one was with Greece. But nonetheless, the whole thing about shadow committees. Because when I got further into it, you guys know me, if you've been following me, I'll just go back to the Wayback Time Machine. And now it's working right before there's some issues. So this year, April 9, 2024, the only timestamp in the entire existence of this site mentions specifically international perspectives on sustainable finance, financing net zero transaction or transitions, and sustainable fintech, organized by ISO and CYS. All right, here's where it gets, you want to call it juicy, if you will. First area of emphasis is on Dr. Weilun Lao. Why point out this guy? He's a general manager of digital department from Guangzhou Southern Investment Group. Okay, I could get away with that because I'm 1/8 Chinese. All right. General manager of digital department, ISO Technical Committee 322, by the way, Sustainable Finance, convener of ADHOC Group of FinTech Carbon Markets. All right, get to the point. Projects applying for AI, again, back to the whole thing of even JPMorgan's reference, blockchain, IoT. How many times I talk about Jasmine and the whole mix? Security technology, being very active in ISO, IEC, IEEE, currently serving, by the way, as the convener for ISO TC 307 Quant Network Standard. So there's your boiler mash stick to stew, the first one of the outline, and slash AHG4, which I'll be honest, I got to study that one a little bit more, but hey, we're all learning. And he's got some of these other ones. But again, emphasis on that. All right. There's another particular person that's on this list who is Mrs. Christiana, Aristidou. I probably not pronounced that right. She's a CEO, partner, transitional technology lawyer. She's a big deal too. We'll get into her in a bit, but back to Dr. Weilun Lao, okay? Because on this PDF, which comes from sagroups.ieee.org, page 10 of 16, he's a contributor to the China Southern Power Grid Co. Limited. Now, if you've been following me for at least over a year, I don't know if you guys remember the whole coverage of the patent that was tied into a thing called fast pay, or and then it mentioned quant in Chinese. I'm not saying that this is the mystery that's been solved and that's the answer, but I thought this was interesting. And it's not just me mentioning China just because, I'm talking about BRICS nations and stuff like that. No, I'm not going to do that. But what I will show you is the significance of this. And this absolutely blew me away. Because when we get more into this, guess what pops up? It's this. On a simple Google search that leads you to even just Wikipedia. And I understand you can't use this for official college reference. Hey, it's okay. Because here's the thing. China Southern Power Grid Company Limited. Here's the highlight. They bring in revenue of the US dollar equivalent of $118.8 billion as of 2023, because let's face it, 2024 is not officially over, so you got to wait for that report. They have a net income of $2.3 billion, total assets of $173 billion, my gosh, and they employ 268,471 employees as of 2023. All right, here's your highlight, literally highlighted. China Southern Power Grid, I'm still a little hoarse, accounts for 20% of the Chinese grid, everybody, while SGCC accounts for the remaining 80%. And look at all these administrative departments, audit, inspection, just everything, all sorts of subsidiaries, branches, stocks, you name it. But my goodness, 20% of the Chinese grid? So we talk about utility in motion. Don't sleep on your quant, especially with that interoperability. All right, is that all I have? No. The answer is no. Because if you go over to this official, I guess you could say, journal, there's a PDF. If you're the type of person, you're in college or whatever the case, but you just want to do research. It's from sciencedirect.com. Never mind. Some people don't share their sources. I don't know why they do that. I don't care. Ask me for my sources. I'm fine. A lot of times you guys request it 2 or 3 months later, and I lose it. But anyway, nonetheless, carbon emission data management system fusion of multi-source data. Again, Dr. Weilun Lao. Okay. So that's interesting. And again, why point it out? Well, if we go to this PDF from sciencedirectassets.com, page 1 of 9, what do you see? The 4th International Conference on Machine Learning and Big Data Analytics for IoT Security and Privacy. Some of you hardcore enthusiasts could literally say, you should have just included Jasmine as part of this. Yeah, you also can include IOTA, right? Because we are talking about ISO. So, carbon emission data management system fusion of multi-source data. Dr. Weilun Lao. Okay. Well, is that it? Nope, not quite. Because I did mention that other lady, Christiana Aristidou, technology lawyer, transnational regulatory compliance. Remember how Gilbert Verdian, everybody talked about the whole call to action? Call to actions involve lawyers at some point. I mean, Gilbert's incredibly brilliant, but he needs a legal team, just like Ripple has Stuart Alderati, right? Enter in Christiana Aristidou. Probably not pronouncing it right. But anyway, you see, boom, boil it, mash it, stick it in stew, ISO TC 307, Quant Network Standard, blockchain expert, working group 3, project leader. Interesting. And how many times have I cited Sentinelec? Right, multiple times. How many times have I cited JTC? Not just JTC1, but some of these other ones. But artificial intelligence, I'm telling you flat out, how many times do we say that over the course of late this year, going to 2025, you're going to see more info about quant and AI? Boom. There you go. Okay. And, Blockchain and Climate Institute, Queen Mary, University of London. So she has experience. A little bit more about her for just a brief moment. Here's her with her glasses. So she actually looks totally different. I did verify. It's the same person, I promise you. How so? Well, it's because, again, the whole citation on ISO TC 307. But here's the thing. She's an industry expert. She, for example, has worked with all sorts of investors, entrepreneurs, intersection of regulation, business law. She's the CEO of a thing called Hybrid Law Tech Firm. It's been around since 1997. Again, she's part of Quant Network Standard ISO TC 307 Working Group 3. I mean, just like robust history, big time. Wrote a whole bunch of different publications about digital assets. She's going to be at like some key events coming up in February. And obviously, you might chop that up when February comes. All right, getting more into this, because I want you guys to understand that, again, this narrative about quant has no role in the United States. Again, are you sure about that? So this is from NIST.gov. How many times I talk about NIST in the past? Computer Security Division, CSD, Applied Cybersecurity Division, ACD. NIST actively participates, holds leadership positions in what? The Quant Network Standard of ISO TC 307. Once again, blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, and its U.S. Mirror Committee. They have contributed to other ISO standards. And, boom, the United States. Well, guess what? Hedera even has a presence. Recently, it was reported that Hedera has key partnerships with NVIDIA. Shout out to Channing. He gave me a heads up about that. Some of you other guys mentioned it, Sebastian. But NVIDIA Intel to leverage technology for creating verifiable compute, hardware-based solution. That sounds interesting. Because when we get more into the weeds about this, what about ISO? Well, NVIDIA has communication, environment, and social expectations and agreement of manufacturer environment compliance, including not just one ISO standard, but literally 2, 3, 4 of these. And getting into the weeds of which ones, well, look at this. It's ISO 27001, and we already confirmed this when it came to things like what? Like your Jasmines, if you will, and some of these other ones. Because, like it says, ISO 27001 has a working group with TC 307. And why is that important? Because it's a collaboration with their standard. All right, what about these other ones that we don't know about? What does, ISO 14001 part of NVIDIA have a working group with the Quant Network Standard or TC307? Yes, it does. 14,000 family of standards provides guidance requirements for environmental management systems. The standards help organizations minimize their impact on the environment, meet legal and regulatory requirements, awesome, and improve their environmental performance. Okay. But what else is it mentioned in regards to their 14,000 family? Audits, communications. So audits, you have quant authorized, right? So that, it meets that criteria. All right, what about that last one? Does ISO 45001 with NVIDIA have a working group with ISO TC307? Yes. Once again, joint working group 1 between ISO JTC1 with, for example, SC27 and TC307 Quant Network Standard. 45001 is an international standard. Again, this is a basic search, everybody, for occupational health and safety management systems. Enter in who? Somebody like Laura Verdian. How cool is that? And I love this quote from the one and only Greg Lunt. I'll just get down to this part. You guys need to hear this. This is not speculation. I agree with him. Only 14.88 million QNT tokens exist. 2/3 the supply of Bitcoin. Let that soak in if you're new to this. And when Overledger is the backbone of the global financial system, $100 QNT will feel like a rounding error. I couldn't agree more. And I love this analogy. Again, former teacher, I got to give analogies to the kids. If you're overly excited today, you might actually lack the vision to see the token's true potential and how it will manifest. Be careful celebrating a puddle when you're standing at the edge of an ocean. I couldn't agree more. I think that's the quote of the year. So with that said, simply do me a favor. If you listen to the entire outline and simply type this into the comments, and that is overnight, and I'll know you listen to the entire outline. I really appreciate you guys listening to these outlines. As the saying goes, what you have, no way you hold it, the research trumps FUD 110%. Happy, or merry, I should say, Christmas Eve to each and every single one of you. Always rooting for you guys. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, the whole shebang. I won't keep you any bit further. And again, look out for more outlines. I'm going to try my best to bring you guys more content, of more substance, deep dives, whatever you want to call it. Some are shorter than others, some aren't. But that's what we do here. All right. Have a good one, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
If managing your crypto feels like solving a puzzle, it's time to switch to Decent Wallet. It's just a few taps. You can manage, track, and secure your crypto with unmatched ease. And here's the best part. Grab your Decent Wallet at a discounted price by using the referral link below. Don't miss out on making your crypto experience smoother and more secure.